Angela, first, let me tell you a little about John and me. We met at a party when we were in our early 20s. We immediately hit it off, and soon marriage seemed inevitable. This turned out to be the right decision, even a very successful one. I can honestly say that John is my best friend. Our intimate life is good, even more than good. I think we've tried all the right options. I flipped through the relevant books, and we tried everything that didn't seem completely ridiculous, disgusting, or dangerous. John met Brian about 7 years ago when they both worked for the same company. We met his wife Kate soon after, and pretty quickly we all became friends. They supported us when things were difficult. Brian has a great sense of humor, and Kate is very nice and one of my closest friends. I would describe both of them as charismatic people. They attract others. I'm not talking about sex, people just love them. They're both actually quite cute. Kate has an amazing figure and Brian has beautiful eyes. For some reason, they also sympathize with us. We often had dinner at each other's houses. We once went skiing together to a small place in Austria, and it was amazing. Unfortunately, 6 or 7 months ago, they had to move to Birmingham because of Brian's new job. We were sad, but happy for him. I was afraid that the friendship would fade, as it often does, and be reduced to an annual Merry Christmas card with the text, "We should really meet this year." Luckily, John had started a project near Birmingham. Brian and Kate insisted that he stay with them. Of course, it was much nicer than living in a dull hotel every week. Of course, we had concerns, because living with another couple is not at all the same as just being friends. However, after thanking them both, John decided to give it a try, and it went fine. This was great for me, too much better than calling the hotel. I probably spent as much time talking to Brian and Kate as I did to John. John was usually there a couple of nights a week, although I remember one time he stayed over the weekend because he had to work. A month or so later, John called and said that Brian would be in London for the whole of the next week, and that he would only be going to Birmingham for one night on Tuesday. Would it be okay if Brian stayed with us for a week? Well, of course, I was delighted. It was so great to see him again and thank them for the hospitality they showed John. That Monday, I returned home early and worked hard to prepare a good dinner. John and Brian arrived together. It was so nice to see Brian again. He looked as fit as ever, and we hugged and kissed warmly. He brought a very expensive bottle of Burgundy, which complemented our dinner perfectly. Everything was like the good old days. We joked and remembered what we did together and also discussed mutual friends. John was a little quiet, but he wasn't as outgoing as Brian. Toward the end of dinner, Brian complimented me on the dinner he had prepared and suggested that he take me to a great restaurant the next night while John was away. I refused, saying it wasn't necessary after all they had done for John. Brian insisted, explaining that these were just his business trips, and John had taken them to restaurants more than once. John also supported the idea, so I had no choice but to politely agree. To be honest, I was delighted. He suggested a very fancy place that I had always wanted to go to, and besides, I always found Brian to be a great conversationalist. Brian said he would take care of the arrangements and call me at work the next day. Shortly before lunch, Brian called and said everything was settled and he had made a reservation. He suggested meeting at a restaurant since he had to stay late at work. We agreed that we would both arrive by taxi so that neither of us would miss the opportunity to enjoy the evening. I got home early, showered, and, feeling pretty inspired, put on one of my best dresses with full makeup and jewelry. It was fun. I called a taxi, and 5 minutes later I found myself at the restaurant. Brian was already there. He stood up, gave me a warm hug and kiss, as usual, and complimented me, saying I looked amazing. I felt honored. The food was divine, as was the wine. We drank a fair bit, but didn't overdo it. Overall, it was a wonderful evening. It was great, just the two of us. We probably spent half the evening just laughing when we weren't eating, of course. Finally, it was time to leave. Brian didn't let me look at the bill, but it must have been substantial. The restaurant called us a taxi, and we got in, with Brian putting his arm around my shoulders. We drove. I pressed my head against him, feeling relaxed and dreamy. What a wonderful evening. It wasn't that late yet, so I poured us both a glass of brandy and we settled down on the sofa. Brian took my hand as if by chance. He said, "You and John have been friends of mine for years. I love and respect you both very much. Your friendship is very important to me, and I don't want to lose it. Now I'm going to say something that might really offend you, but I have to say it." I started wondering what could have happened. Maybe something went wrong while John was staying with them. "I really, really want to make love to you, and I ask you to do it." I was shocked. I know it sounds naive, but I didn't expect this at all. I probably just mumbled, "That's impossible," or something like that. "Why not?" he asked with that smile of his. "You know why not. There is Kate, there is John. This is wrong. It won't hurt them. This is just between the two of us. Look, I know it sounds cliché, but I love you very much. I think it will be something special and very wonderful for both of us. All I ask is that you think about it. The offer remains valid. I won't rush you or force you. It should be your decision." I didn't say anything. I felt terrible. "I won't put any pressure on you," he said, "but there is one thing I must do." He reached out to me, took my face in his hands, and kissed me. This changed something in me. I think if he continued, I might give in. But he didn't. He just sat back and looked at me, smiling again. "So, I must have made all sorts of excuses. How could we do this? We have to think about the others. How can we look them in the eye after this?" And everything I could think of. He didn't argue. He simply repeated what he had already said and told me how much he cared about me. Suddenly, I realized that I had been holding his hand all this time and quickly let go. Eventually, we had to go to bed. The next day, we both had to work. We politely said goodbye for the night, and I thanked him for a wonderful dinner. He suddenly laughed and said how British we were. I grinned too. That night, I was confused. I couldn't imagine meeting John the next evening with Brian around. But I couldn't ask Brian to leave. It would be impossible to explain without showing all the cards. He kept his word and did not put pressure on me. I couldn't ruin everything, throw away our friendship, because he might have gone crazy, most likely because of the wine. I was worried all the time that he would come into my room, and I imagined how I should react. It seemed to me that I heard extraneous sounds, and I thought it was him. To make matters worse, I was extremely excited. Everything would be much simpler if I didn't like him so much. I couldn't sleep. To help myself, I began to imagine that John was nearby, and I was almost dozing off with this pleasant fantasy when I suddenly realized with horror that I was imagining the face and body not of John, but of Brian. The next morning, I was in a terrible state. Brian didn't look much better. I'd be pretty pissed off if he was as fresh as a cucumber. Before we both had to leave, he spoke to me quietly. He said he understood how difficult it was for me and apologized for causing me trouble. He confirmed everything he had said earlier, damn him, but added that he was in no way going to embarrass me or John this evening. "Trust me a little, please," he said. The strangest thing is that I really trusted him. We left for work. I had already more or less come to terms with the situation and the fact that I would have to somehow cope with the rest of the week in the British way again when suddenly the phone rang. It was John. "How was dinner?" "Wonderful." John said he would have to stay in Birmingham for the rest of the week and wouldn't be back until Friday. I was stunned. How can I cope with Brian and I being alone? John continued to ramble on about his shirts and underwear and how he needed to buy them or ask Kate to wash them. I was much less concerned about his underwear than I was about the contents of mine and Brian's, especially Brian's. What should I do? "Okay, everything is fine. Take care of yourself." Damn British. I returned home, expecting in horror that Brian was already there. He had the key to the house. He wasn't there. I felt relieved, albeit slightly. I took a shower and put on simple clothes, a regular blouse and a long skirt. I was just finishing up putting on some light makeup when I realized that Brian was already standing behind me, watching me. I smudged my lipstick and wiped it off in frustration. He smiled and extended his hand to me with a gorgeous bouquet of flowers. I had already decided that it was better to act as if his craziness had never happened. I thanked him and awkwardly hugged him, kissing him on the cheek. Then I went downstairs, put flowers in a vase, and prepared dinner. We sat down at the table and made small talk. I expected him to say something, but he just chatted, joked as usual, and was the same pleasant conversationalist. After we put the dishes away and I put everything in order, I was almost congratulating myself on how well everything was turning out when I suddenly felt him behind me. He hugged me. After a few kisses, he pulled away, took a step back, and looked into my eyes. He stopped and waited. Hesitantly, I continued. We made love, and my memory of the moment is blurry. After that, we lay hugging each other, and I began to say that it was a mistake, that we need to forget about it. But before I could finish my sentence, MWE went to the bedroom and made love again. We hastily got ourselves in order. We both had to go to work. Breakfast was hasty. We kissed and hurried about our business, managing to say only a few words to each other. At work, I felt like I was in a dream all day. All the events of last night flashed through my head, mixing with thoughts about the evening that lay ahead. I had little doubt that we would end up in bed again. Somewhere in the back of my mind, there were thoughts that we would make love. And then, when he returned to Birmingham, I would say that we need to stop. Ha! We had plenty of time that evening. We did everything that lovers do, and it all seemed new and fresh. At some point, the phone rang. It was John. I was wearing only Brian's shirt and nothing else. We talked. How's Brian? Do you care about him? How is Kate? Give her my regards. It was strange. I was pleased to talk with him, happy to hear his voice. Very happy. I loved John. When I hung up, Brian hugged me, and we just sat there for a while. Then we kissed, and it all started again. It's Friday, Brian has left, and I'm waiting to see my husband. Perhaps I should have felt something special. Of course I was nervous, but I was happy and looked forward to meeting John. I made dinner and sat down listening to music, thinking about Brian, John, and my situation. At 10 o'clock in the evening, I heard John's key turn in the lock. I went to meet him. An unfaithful wife goes to meet her husband. We hugged and kissed long and tender. I was truly glad to see him. We chatted over dinner and then went to bed. We made love tenderly and very attentively to each other. The next day was Saturday. At breakfast, I thought John might notice something, but no. Thank God for men. It was one of the best weekends we've ever had. Perhaps it was the fear of loss that made me truly appreciate John. We spent time together and made love more than we had in months, if not years. Brian came to see us again on Tuesday. That evening, John was also at home. I was terribly nervous, but like Brian said, we still had to get through it, and the sooner the better. Everything went great. Everyone was friendly and relaxed. Brian and I exchanged no glances or touches. But at night, as I made love to my husband and lay next to him, I thought about my lover sleeping just a few feet away. The next morning, John was the first to leave. This gave Brian and I a few minutes to hug and kiss before we had to go too. Over the next weeks, Brian visited quite often. If John was home, we were just good friends. If he wasn't there, Brian and I became lovers, passionate lovers. Gradually, I got used to this situation. Sometimes I stopped and thought, what am I doing? But I was too happy to seriously think about changing anything. I continued to be surprised that John didn't notice anything until I realized that he himself seemed to have changed. He seemed somehow lighter, as if on wings, and was less irritated by little things. I started to wonder why. His behavior was so similar to mine. Maybe the reason is the same, and if so, who? Gradually, I began to get the feeling that I was guessing. I began to think about this very seriously. We had to act very, very carefully. The first thing I did was talk to Brian. Does Kate know that you and I are sleeping? For the first time in our entire relationship, he looked slightly confused. He hesitated for a few moments, looked at me and said, yes. I pressed him, asking if it bothered her. He replied, no, she is happy for both of us. He then explained that he and Kate accepted that anyone could have affairs. Since we were all such close friends, he couldn't hide our affair from her. When we got into bed and made love, I felt that he was a little tense. Well, good. I called Kate a couple of days later when I knew Brian wouldn't be around. Kate, I understand that you know that Brian and I are having an affair, right? If I were wrong, I would really be in a difficult situation. Yes, how are you doing? Great. Tell me, do you really mind? No, honestly, I don't mind. I know Brian has had feelings for you for a long, long time. This is something really good for him. And for you too, as I understand it. You are a person whom I truly consider my friend. This may sound strange, but I would rather Brian sleep with someone I know and love than an enemy or a stranger. Okay, Kate, I want to ask you one more question. Before you answer, I want you to know that I will not be angry, no matter what your answer is. I paused. Are you sleeping with John? There was a long pause, then. Yes. Are you sure you're not angry? I would be a hypocrite if I got angry. Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate it. It may be strange to thank the man who sleeps with your husband, but what can you do? Britons, as usual. Do you want to talk more about this, Kate? I don't think it's worth it now. Have you already figured out how you will solve this? Yes. We talked awkwardly for another minute, then I said, goodbye. Goodbye, and good luck to you, Angela. I should have hated her for saying those words, but instead, for some reason, they touched me deeply. It happened a few days later, on Saturday morning. John and I were in bed, and there was no reason to rush to get up. I turned to him and asked, tell me, if you were going to go to bed with someone other than me, who would it be? I started listing the names of several movie stars and models. No reaction. Then I began to name the names of our acquaintances and friends. When I mentioned one of my college friends, Mary, his face changed. Interesting, you're a cunning one, I thought. Then I said rather casually, what about Kate? Would you like to sleep with her? Oh, so you want to sleep with Kate, huh? It turns out you're a naughty person, I said. He was silent. Okay, then I'll let you sleep with her. Do you want this? Still silent. Come on, I give you permission. Do you want to have sex with her? Come on, say it. He answered with such effort as if his teeth were being pulled out. I want to sleep with Kate. That's it. There is only one condition, John, my dear little mischief maker. If you sleep with Kate, then it's only fair that I sleep with Brian. Do you still want to sleep with Kate? After another long silence, he finally managed to say, yes. Then do you mind if Brian sleeps with me? Come on, say it. You can go to bed with Brian. He can have sex with you. Okay, now you have to do something right now. I wonder what he was thinking when he had sex with me. John now behaved like a sheep being led to the slaughter. On Monday, John went to see Kate and Brian came to see me that evening. Nothing else was discussed. As John left, I kissed him and said, have a good time. You too. When John returned on Wednesday evening, I greeted him warmly and asked how it had gone. Everything is fine, and you? Yes, I had a wonderful time, thank you. Did you sleep with Kate? Yeah. Well, thank God. It would be terrible if I were the only one to commit treason. I put my hands on his shoulders and asked, do you still want to make love to me? Yes. Me too. I really, really want to. Let's do it right now. It was a strange feeling, knowing what each of us did the day before, knowing that each knows what the other did. I'm sure that for John, as for me, thoughts returned again and again to our absent lovers and the memories of what we did with them. Strange, maybe, but I can say that it was one of the most erotic experiences of my life. Over the next 2 or 3 weeks, Brian visited us regularly, and John visited Kate and Brian. Basically, we tried to organize everything so that the men were in different places. If John and Brian were together, we acted as if nothing had changed, just a friend staying over for the night. It's stupid, of course, but I think we were all too embarrassed to do otherwise. 3 weeks later, I spoke to John in bed and asked if that Monday was really the first time he slept with Kate. Long pause. He admitted that this was not the first time, And then, seeing that I was not too angry, he began to tell me about everything. John. When I went to Birmingham, I had no intention or thought of sleeping with Kate. Of course, I found her attractive. I noticed her figure, it is truly excellent. But that's all. You and I talked about this no less when we discussed them. I was actually more worried about how things would go with me living with them. I was afraid that I might become a burden to them. And to be honest, I was afraid that this might turn out to be a burden for me. I would have to adapt to their way of life. My first feelings were joy and relief. It was just great and fun to be with them again. Kate prepared a wonderful dinner in honor of my arrival, but immediately made it clear that from now on I would have my own key and I would deal with daily affairs myself. We all had a great time talking. I think Kate was hinting at her two men, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Later, Brian went to bed after wishing me good night. Kate came up to me and asked if I knew where everything was. She then said she was glad I was here, came over and gave me a quick kiss, saying, "Good night, sleep well," and left. We used to always kiss on the cheeks. This kiss, just a light, fleeting one, touched me, but I still didn't attach any importance to it. The next evening dinner was much simpler, sausages and potatoes. When we went to bed, the same thing happened, only this time Brian was there. A light kiss, but not longer. The next evening, when we returned home, Kate went to shower, and then came down wearing jeans and a t-shirt and nothing else. I think she was probably wearing panties, but what she definitely wasn't wearing was a bra. I tried not to stare and hide my interest. I was sure they both must have noticed it. I went to bed first, quickly saying goodnight to hide my embarrassment. A few minutes later, I heard a soft knock on the door and a voice. "Are you dressed?" I was dressed, although I was only in pajamas. Kate came in. "Is everything okay? You looked upset." I assured her that everything was really fine, probably stuttering. "Are you absolutely sure? Maybe there is something you want to tell me about?" "There's nothing," I said. "I am very, very attached to you, John, and I want you to have a good time while you are here. If you ever need it, I hope you'll talk to me." Then she put her hand on my shoulder and kissed me again, this time. The next day I returned home to you. I spent the weekend in some confusion. The more I thought about it, the more stupid I thought I was. Not wearing a bra in your own home is far from an invitation to cheat. I've kissed a lot of women on the lips, in a purely friendly way, and it was never an invitation to bed. However, my desire was high, and you got your share of it, although I hope you didn't know why. I came back determined to act like an adult and not turn out to be a complete creep by trying to seduce my friend's wife. The week passed without incident. Nothing significant happened. I just talked to both of them a lot, especially Kate. On Thursday evening, Brian had to go out and returned late. Kate and I just had a wonderful evening discussing all sorts of things. It seemed to me that by the end, we began to understand each other much better. When we went to bed, Brian still hadn't returned, so she came over to kiss me. I had to stay over the weekend because I had to work on Saturday and an important meeting on Monday. We all had a good drink on Friday night. After dinner, Kate sat on Brian's lap and began hugging him. And again, I got my kiss. When I returned from work on Saturday around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, only Kate was home. Brian had left to play golf or do some shit like that, and wasn't due back until Sunday evening. "Come on, we need to take your mind off the meeting on Monday." I only had an hour to work, and we agreed that I would do it on Sunday morning. After a late lunch, we drove and then walked through the hills to get some fresh air. As we passed through the stile, I extended my hand to help Kate down. When she came down, we were still holding hands. She smiled widely and said, "I'm so glad you're my friend, John." We continued to walk in silence. That day was one of those rare moments when you don't need to say anything at all, and if you speak, it's easy and natural. We returned to the car. At some point, we ended up hugging each other. We drove home, discussing whether we should have dinner at home or in a restaurant and what to do the next day. It seemed like this moment would last forever. We had dinner at home. We were both tired after our walk. We ate an omelet with toast. After dinner, we sat curled up on the sofa, sipping wine. At some point, I tried to say something. I don't think I knew exactly what I wanted to say. She simply put her finger to my lips and softly said, SHH. Eventually, it's time to go to bed. It sounds naive, but it came as a surprise to me. It's time to go to bed. Will we sleep separately or together? If I had a moment of choice, it passed without me even noticing it. When she came up and kissed me, I realized that we were going to different rooms. I felt that I had to somehow object or at least offer an alternative. But I couldn't. I was too confused and didn't understand what was happening. I didn't want to ruin this fragile moment of happiness with some clumsy attempt. I'm afraid thoughts of you or Brian played no role in my indecision. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up and thinking about walking down the corridor and going into Kate's bed. The next morning, when I came downstairs, Kate was already on her feet. She smiled, came up to me, hugged me, and kissed me warmly. The heat of the night has passed. The sun was shining. I started preparing for tomorrow's meeting, and work was going surprisingly well. Afterwards, we went to the street market, where each shop became a reason for us to rejoice and celebrate our new unity. We walked holding hands, hugging or apart, but at the same time feeling each other, connected by invisible lines of mutual understanding. We returned home. The combination of my fears about the future and the tension of the moment plunged me into a kind of uncertainty. In the evening, we sat together on the sofa. The phone rang. It was Brian. He had already drunk more than he should have, and said that he would stay there overnight and come home in the morning and change clothes before work. I understood what was being said. Kate hung up. We looked at each other. Finally, something broke. I reached out to her, and we made love. Later, we took some food from the refrigerator and an unfinished bottle of wine. We sat naked, ate, and drank. By mutual agreement, we went upstairs and got into my bed. When my alarm clock rang, I jumped up, torn between anxiety about the upcoming meeting and an even greater fear that Brian might already be back. He wasn't there. We showered together, got dressed, and had breakfast. When it was time for me to leave, she hugged me tightly and wished me luck. The meeting went very well, even better than I expected. As the day wore on, I had more time to think about the situation I was in. I took the bus to their street. As I walked the last few steps home, the feeling of unreality became more and more overwhelming to me. Brian and Kate were both at home. Both asked me about the meeting. Everything on the surface was normal. Any strangeness in my behavior could be explained by the tension after the meeting. Later, after my goodnight kiss, Brian and Kate went to their bedroom, and I went to mine. I felt completely and unreasonably miserable as I lay there and thought about the two of them. I fell asleep. At night, I woke up sleepily. Someone whispered to me. I came to my senses when Kate slid into my bed. What? SHH, you'll wake Brian up. Everything will be fine if we are quiet. He's fast asleep. I was so happy she was here. We made love. I fell asleep. When I woke up, Kate was long gone. This became our routine. If Brian was away, we slept together all night. If not, then almost every night Kate would sneak up on me, and after whispering and making love, she would go back. I was too happy to think wisely about the risks. But 2 weeks later, I woke up to the sound of my alarm clock. I saw Kate's head sleeping on the pillow next to me. In the hallway, I heard Brian getting up. In a panic, I woke Kate up. She greeted me weakly. When she realized what had happened, she simply shrugged and said, "Well, it can't be changed now. I'll figure it out." She left the room barefoot. I got dressed, not daring to go to the bathroom, and sat there, waiting. I was ready to be thrown out of the house. I heard the front door close and ventured out. Whoever left, I felt much more confident facing just one of them. Kate was downstairs. "Here, I made you toast and coffee. You don't have much time." She sat next to me while I ate and drank. "Listen, John, Brian will be late at work today. We'll talk when you get back. I love you and everything will be okay. I promise." I felt like a fish out of water. It was even difficult for me to breathe. We left together and I went to the bus stop. I was thinking about not going back there in the evening. I was thinking of going home by train or to Scotland or wherever. But of course, I still returned. I was home first. I waited nervously for several minutes until I heard the sound of Kate's key. She came in, put her things down, and looked at me. Then she came to me, hugged me, and we held each other tightly. Finally, I asked, "What about Brian?" "Everything is fine." "What do you mean normal?" "He just found out that I was sleeping with his wife." "I can't believe you could come up with some innocent explanation for being in my room last night." "John, of course he knows. He has known everything for a long time. You don't think I could come into your room every night and he wouldn't notice?" I muttered something incomprehensible. I really didn't think at all. "Tell me, when Brian was out on the golf course or out in the evening, did you ever wonder where he really was?" "No, I didn't think about it. I only thought about her." "Brian has a mistress, several mistresses to be precise. He knows that what happened was my decision. You didn't do anything I didn't want, and I really wanted this, to be honest. That's how everything works for us. If you don't want to be with me anymore, it's your decision. But I love you, and I hope that we will continue our relationship as lovers and as friends for a long time." I still wanted her on any terms. Brian came later. I felt awkward. He looked almost the same as always, except maybe a little cheerful. That night, when we went to bed, Kate came with me, and we slept together. In the middle of the night, I heard her quietly slip out of bed. Much later, she returned. "Angela." "And that's how it happened," John said. He looked at me carefully, trying to understand how I took his story. How angry was I going to be? If I was going to be angry, I don't think it would be at him. However, I didn't want to let him go so easily, at least for now. I doubt many men could resist Kate if she decided to seduce them, and John and I gave her every opportunity to do this. I had a picture of John as a Spanish bull driven into the arena and Kate waving her cape, playing to the audience before delivering the killing blow. No wonder I hate bullfighting. Damn it, I'm even starting to feel sorry for the poor guy. If I'm being honest with myself, I'm actually impressed with how long he lasted and resisted. However, being honest with myself at this moment was not my main goal. There were things I wanted to understand. Did John know, or perhaps even be somehow complicit in my own seduction? And also, how did he feel when he returned to me? Reluctantly, John continued. John. It was strange. My thoughts and feelings were completely confused when I first returned home after sleeping with Kate. And yet, when I saw you, I was so happy, and thinking about her didn't change that. I even had to stop myself from blurting out about Kate, as if that would make you happy too. Madness. I broke out in a cold sweat when this first happened. It's hard to talk about this without sounding like I'm trying to justify myself. I realized that I loved you so much, and there was nothing I could do to fix what had already happened, even if I wanted to. So, I don't know, I just continued to love you. It just seemed even stronger. I'm sorry, that's the best explanation I can give for how I feel. I wouldn't blame you then, and I won't blame you now if you want to leave me. I can't argue. All I can say is that despite everything we've both done, I don't want to leave you. I don't want to lose you. What about the fact that I was seduced by Brian? Angela reminded him gently. Kate asked me how I would feel if you slept with someone, and more specifically, with Brian. I think my answer was that it should be your decision, but if you decide, it will be okay. Considering what I had already done, I couldn't pretend to be the outraged husband. Was I willing to give Brian that chance? I was worried about what this might mean for you. I think Kate assured me that this would be persuasion, not coercion. I agreed. Brian was going to come, and it was easy to arrange for him to be there while I went away for the night. And how did you feel about this, John? Sitting there, encouraging me to go out to dinner with a man, knowing that he would try to get me into bed so he could sleep with me when I had no idea. It was strange. I felt very confused. Does that excite you? Now I felt awkward, very awkward. Yes, I whispered. When I was with Kate, I kept imagining the two of you. The next day, I wondered what had happened. Kate said she didn't know. That morning, she called me and asked me to stay until the end of the week without explaining why. I stayed and called you, feeling like a complete fool. I remember I was just talking nonsense. As the week went on, I became more and more convinced that you did it. I called you and wondered if I was interrupting you. Kate refused to tell me. She said if I want to know, I should ask you. I didn't dare. Angela, we were both seduced, and they did it very skillfully. Was I angry? Part of me was angry, angrier than ever. Furious. The other part looked at this anger with cold indifference, with contempt. I already said that Brian and Kate supported us. But they did even more. About 3 years ago, neighbors from hell moved into the neighboring house. They were even worse than one could imagine and seemed intent on making our lives miserable. Conflicts, threats, vandalism, defecation, and much more. Later, we found out that they were trying to survive us in order to reduce the price of our house and buy it cheap. We quickly realized that between our neighbors and our mortgage, if we sold the house, we would have no equity and instead be left with debt. We decided to stay. We were afraid to leave the house even for one night. Kate stayed with me overnight when John was away, and I was too afraid to be home alone. Some threats involved violence. It was Kate and Brian who looked after the house for a week while we desperately needed a vacation. When it became clear that the police weren't going to do anything, it was Brian who installed cameras and recording devices, including some that showed our neighbors doing something much worse than ordinary harassment in their own home. If we had known, we probably would have just given up and left, but it's hard to believe that such things can happen in England. Our other friends stayed away or gave unhelpful advice. We didn't go to bed with Brian and Kate out of gratitude. But our subsequent reactions, John's and mine, were definitely colored by our past with Kate and Brian. I read somewhere that the two greatest pleasures in life are to seduce and to be seduced. Being seduced is more of a pleasure, and it's something that can only really happen to you once or twice. However, if you have the skills and desire, you can seduce many times. I think it was said more succinctly. When John told me about his seduction, I was incredibly excited and at the same time jealous of Kate. It felt weird, like I was watching an extremely sexy movie and wanted to be on both sides. I wanted to be John who was being seduced. I wanted to be Kate. I was so jealous of Kate because I wanted to be her, seducing John like that. I absolutely loved what John told me. This realization was perhaps decisive for me. Kate later admitted to me that she and Brian were confident that this would be a good fit for us. They even discussed how to offer us an exchange of partners, but did not know how to approach this. They were afraid that things would get out of control. John's arrival was too good an opportunity for them to pass up. To tell the truth, I'm not angry. I'm happy. I have two men whom I love. Perhaps it is a sandcastle that will soon collapse. Maybe I'm a fool. All this could turn into a real nightmare, a real hell, and perhaps it will turn around again. It's not easy. Sometimes I panic. This is a situation that requires serious effort on my part and on the part of everyone else. But this is true for any relationship. We are what we are. I'm happy with what I have and who I am. I love what John and I were seduced to. I adore the people who seduced us. Everything did not remain the same. Kate came to visit us for the weekend. Brian was with one of his other lovers, whom he had been somewhat neglecting lately. Kate arrived early on Friday evening. I was nervous before she arrived, but within seconds we both felt the same as before, only now with the added interest of having two men in common. John arrived much later, I suspect deliberately. Tact or cowardice, who knows? He stood with the expression on his face like a puppy who is not sure whether he will be greeted or scolded. Kate hugged him. We chatted awkwardly for a few minutes. Kate turned to me. It's been so long since I've seen John. Do you mind if I take him to bed right now? I was a little confused, but to hell with it. I picked up the tug. Don't say it's not strong. Of course, go. She took his hand and led him upstairs. I remained sitting, trying not to listen to any sounds. Unable to concentrate on anything, I turned on my favorite music. Finally, they both went downstairs. Kate looked radiant and a little disheveled. John looked embarrassed. I was already used to this expression on his face. I smiled at Kate. Now it's my turn, I guess. I took John's hand and went upstairs. I was pleased to see that he had no problem with it. In the end, he fell asleep next to me, begging for mercy. I love John. I love Brian. But I have no doubt who my husband is, with whom I will stay. Brian is my lover and friend. Soon, when he has new lovers, I will see him less often, although I suspect that our relationship as lovers and friends will continue. I hope so. What struck me most was how deep my connection with Kate became. We became closer than sisters. I think this is the core that holds it all together. We communicate a lot in person and on the phone. Brian says that when Kate and I talk, it's hard for John and him to get a word in edgewise. I don't think men understand how important other women are to us. If a woman were given a choice between having sex with a man and talking to another woman, most of us would choose talking to the woman most of the time. John and Brian were both wondering if Kate and I would start girl games, and they were ambivalent about it. Neither Kate nor I are interested in this. I suppose if the two of us were stranded on a desert island for 6 months, we might be interested in each other, but that seems pointless when we have a real alternative and plenty of it. I feel like our marriage is stable. It has as much chance of lasting as it did before all this, or maybe even more. But perhaps now I accept the whole thing, and not just the parts that I was ready to accept. I think all this should have been organized differently, agreed upon in advance. But now we are here, and it is what it is. We have to do everything we can to make it work, or give up on everything. I don't want to give up. Sometimes I panic and think about how John must want so much more to be with Kate, with her charm and amazing figure, with who she is. John is also afraid that Brian is overshadowing him. We are both afraid of losing each other. But knowing how much John wants and loves Kate, I wouldn't want to deprive him of that, just as I don't want to deprive her. Anger is always somewhere nearby, anger at everyone and especially at yourself. I've seen how often people hide in their rage and resentment like a dirty, comforting blanket, because there are things they don't want to face. This is a kind of moral cowardice. I don't want to go down this path. We both gave in to temptation. We betrayed each other, although at that moment it did not seem like a betrayal to either of us. We are imperfect people. Let me tell you a secret. Everyone else is also imperfect. You too. We did what we did. We've had a disaster. We decided to stay together. These were our elections, not yours. You have your flaws, their own disasters, their betrayals both committed by you and against you. It's up to you to face them or run away, in anger, self-righteousness, or whatever you choose. These are your own choices. John and I spend a lot of time comforting and supporting each other. We need it. Strangely, Kate and Brian suffer from the same thing. Brian considers himself shallow compared to John and thinks John is much smarter. Kate laughs and tells me how much Brian was and still is in love with me and how insecure it makes her feel. She says the fact that Brian really cares so much about me makes the situation 5 times harder for her, even though this is what she wants for him and what she would choose for herself. We learned that when we had those terrible neighbors, how afraid Kate and Brian themselves were to stay in our house. We found out how close they were to leaving us. They didn't abandon us. I also learned how much they were both afraid when they seduced us. They were afraid that they were mistaken in their feelings and judgments regarding us. They were afraid that they would ruin everything. They were desperately afraid that they would destroy our marriage and our friendship with them. Strangely, 2 of Kate and Brian's most touching moments had to do with their fears. I think there is one important thing about cheating. It's like marriage. It all depends on who you do it with. Like in that movie, I Choose Life. Also friendship and love. And if you're really lost, kindness will help too. We're holding on somehow. Before all this started, I told myself that I trusted John, and yet, when we were in the company of attractive people, I watched him like a hawk. I carefully watched his reactions and the reactions of the women he was with. I was always ready to intervene, subtly and unnoticed by John. I still watch him and the women. The difference now is that then I tell him where I think the woman is interested. I advise him how to proceed. Twice I helped him end up in bed with someone else. For a long time I felt satisfied with my situation with two men. I haven't forgotten how he reacted to the thoughts of my friend Mary. I've always liked her husband Simon. Possibilities and plans began to run through my mind. All this will require careful preparation. Simon. Angela finished her story and turned to her companion, her audience, lying next to her in bed. Well, dear, what do you think of me now? Simon didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. He felt like he was in some other world. He was a quiet man, reliable, sustainable. He was faithful to his wife. That is, he did not look for opportunities, and on rare occasions when some woman tried to seduce him, he retreated in panic. This chance meeting with his wife's friend broke through his defenses. Events developed on their own. One thing led to another, as they say, and here he is in bed. He perceived this as an unexpected gift of fate, not connected with his real life, not changing anything. He had always thought of Angela as friendly but cold and distant from anything possible. But her story shocked him, turned him over like a key in a lock, until the most devastating ending. Okay, Simon, it's all up to you. We can stop tonight, act as if nothing happened. You have this choice. Or we can continue if you want to keep me as your mistress. Simon felt his blood boil in his veins. Only there are consequences. Yes, Simon understood the consequences perfectly well. He could sleep with Angela again. But Mary, he always felt a certain chemistry between his wife and John. It was never talked about, but whenever John was around, he himself became more wary and vigilant, like a male in a herd protecting his female from a potential rival. He wondered for a moment if it was this weakness that had led to his downfall, to ending up in this bed. Yes, he could have Angela, but at a price. He could be with her, but that would mean he was accepting and facilitating John's seduction of his wife. Or maybe Brian. He felt dizzy from the story. Does this mean Kate is part of the proposal too? He had met her and remembered that she was very attractive, very desirable. Is Mary already John's mistress? God, no. He believed Angela. He could leave, even ruin her reputation if he wanted to. Or he could accept what was offered to him. He was shocked by what he heard. He was horrified by what they had already done just an hour ago. But that didn't stop his desire against. This evening existed outside of time. By giving in here, he didn't make a choice. He moved closer to her. She answered. He knew he was accepting the unthinkable, and he enjoyed it. He let go of everything, and it was his choice. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.